Hey everybody, Sean here, Boosted Miata. Today we are going to replace the oil sender. Actually, this isn't an oil sender, it's an oil on-off switch in the Boosted Miata, and it ain't no good. I want to replace it, so come on, let's do this. So back in 1995, for whatever reason, Mazda decided to take out their actual oil pressure gauge and put in this oil pressure switch, which is kind of ridiculous because all this does is tell you if you have oil pressure above 7 psi. So if you have oil pressure above 7 psi, your gauge will read pretty much in the middle. It doesn't move at all. So at lower RPMs or higher RPMs, warm oil, cold oil, it don't matter. The gauge won't move at all. It'll just stay pretty much in the middle, unless, of course, you fall below 7 psi, then it'll go down, and your engine's probably shot by then. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is use this. This is a VDO oil pressure sender. This thing will actually read 0 to 80 psi, and it's a variable resistor, so it goes from, on the low end at 0 psi, it's like 10 ohm, and on the high end, 80 psi, it's 180 ohm. And it will show you variable positions on your gauge, which is cool. Now, my gauge, if you'll see right here, I'm going to show you. This is how it works right now. It just kind of goes up to the middle, and you'll notice there's no markings on there to indicate what oil pressure is at, which is fine. I mean, what I can do, and I'll do it later, is I think I'm going to actually take an oil pressure reading off my engine and then look at my modified gauge and get an idea of where my correct oil pressure should be on that gauge. So at least I have a mental note of where the oil pressure should be on the gauge. So let's go ahead and take a look. I've already done it on my car. That's why I'm using this photograph of the oil pressure sender. This is something I did up at my brother's shop, and unfortunately I wasn't able to film it at the time. One of the modifications you'll need to do is pretty much just unscrew this one and screw this one in, but what you'll need to do is get an adapter, because the thread in the engine is a 1/8 British pipe thread, BPT I believe it's called. It's a 1/8 28 thread. So the new sender from VDO, that actually has a 1/8 pipe thread, 1/8 27. So what you'll need to do is get an adapter to adapt the 1/8 British thread to the 1/8 regular pipe thread. Or you can do it the hard way, which is what I did, and I actually just re-tapped the existing hole with a 1/8 pipe thread tap. I would recommend just getting an adapter, and it's an easy job in terms of like what to do. It's just a pain in the butt to get to everything, and you'll see here in a second. So let's go check it out. So the oil pressure sender is on the passenger side of the block, and it's right next to your oil filter. Now on the NBs, well, the NB2s with VVT, the oil pressure sender is actually located on the banjo, or on the oil feed line where the banjo bolt goes into the block. Now you can see there I have the VDO gauge installed right next to the filter. Kind of tricky to see. I'm going to shove the camera in there so you can see it better. Now there's a couple things you're going to have to do. You can see there's a terminal on top that uses a round connector. You're going to have to create a splice. You can see that blue connector there. You're going to have to create a jumper type cable so you can plug into your new oil sender there. And as you can see, it's pretty tight. This is really difficult to get to. You can only get really one hand in there. And getting the old sender off is actually pretty easy. All you need for that is you can use, I believe, a 1 1/8 or a 24 millimeter long socket. Get it up in there and unscrew that thing. But to get this new one on, I would recommend using the adapter. Screw the adapter in with a socket using some blue Loctite, not on all the thread, but most of the thread. Get it on there, nice and tight. You want to make sure when you get the new sender in there, you start the threads. And what I would do, and what I did, is I tighten this by hand, but I used thread locker
when I did it. And I used a rag and I got my hand on there and I just tightened it as hard as I possibly could by hand. Because even though there's a nut end that you can't see on the other side of this sender, it's very difficult to get a wrench on it. It's 17 millimeter. You might be able to get a super short stubby wrench on there, but I found it impossible. So what I ended up doing is just grab that thing by hand and I just used a rag and I tightened it as tight as I could get it. And it's on there pretty good. It does not leak and it's fine. And then you want to obviously attach your wire, and you can see I made that adapter that you can see the blue connector there. And I just made like a little jumper to the new pressure sender. And it is all good and it doesn't leak, and that's great.
So now that I have the oil pressure sender installed, the gauge needs to be kind of calibrated. In other words, that gauge isn't really calibrated with this sender. So when that gauge goes up, I really don't know what pressure it's telling me. So in order to figure that out, what I've done is I put a oil pressure gauge. I hooked it up to my VVT system here. I put a line right into the VVT oil feed line here. There's a Allen screw that sits in there that you can pull out, and this will actually give you oil. So I got this hooked up to a gauge that I've attached to my windshield over there, so I can sit in the car and I can actually check the oil pressure sitting in the car and then look at my gauge and understand, okay, this is where 50 pounds of pressure is or whatever. So in the Miata, we want about optimum or maximum pressure, I think is around 54 PSI. That's where the oil relief valve opens and relieves pressure. So the motor should be somewhat cold. So idling cold, it's probably going to be around 50. So we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and start it up and see what happens. See where my oil pressure is. I got my gauge right here. So let's see what happens. All right, so right now that gauge is at approximately 56, 55 now, going down. And on here, it's just below the first tick, well, the second tick, I guess. The first tick above low. So now I'm at almost at 50. I don't know if you can see that, but it says almost 50 there. So I'm probably going to have to let the engine warm up and see where I'm at. I don't trust this gauge now because it went up to like 80 or 90. I don't think that's possible. Maybe, I don't know. So what I got to do now is let the engine warm up and then check it. Okay, the motor's pretty much warmed up. You can see I'm just about halfway between the first and second tick mark, between low and the first mark, and I'm sitting at about 35 PSI according to this gauge. Unfortunately, I think my gauge isn't working right. Maybe tapping into the VVT oil line isn't a good idea because this thing is not very consistent. So I'm going to rev the engine a little bit, build up pressure. And you can see here, I'm up to almost the first tick. I don't know if you can see that. Let me move the light over there. I'm up to almost the first tick there. And I'm about 58. It's going down. And this one is going down slowly. So look, this isn't perfect. Obviously, this gauge isn't really designed to be a functional oil pressure gauge. It's just a general indication. I think what's going on, I've read about this online, but I really didn't look into it that much, but I think there's some kind of damping going on in this gauge that just makes it go really slow. Like, it's already moved down even more. So this isn't perfect, but it does give me a better idea of where my oil pressure is. I kind of know that, okay, at normal oil pressure, I should be at around that first tick mark. And if it drops below that, and when I'm at a high engine speed, then I know I may have a problem. So at idle, I should be closer to the L. And this will obviously change as the oil temp goes up. I'll see that fluctuate a little bit more. So is this perfect? No, not by any means. Let me turn the engine off here. Not perfect by any means, but still better than what was there before. After doing all this and kind of going through this process and putting that gauge in, I'm thinking to myself, is this really worth it? Yeah, it's good. Why not? Do it. Do it. Take you a few hours. And if you like working on your car, why not? It's a fun project. So that's that. Oil pressure gauge is kind of working. Cool. Now, I can also take this needle off this gauge and adjust it. I can pull it off and move it. I've seen that written about online, but that requires taking the binnacle off here and pulling all this off to get to that needle to adjust it. I don't care. I mean, it doesn't bother me where it sits on there. It'd be nicer to have it more in the middle, but it doesn't really bother me. Maybe one day I'll do it if I take my dash apart for other things, because I have other plans for this dash. So when I work on my dash projects, I'll probably adjust that needle. Anyway, I'm done here. Thanks a lot, guys. I really do appreciate you watching my video. And if you want to see more, why don't you subscribe and then hit the little alarm so you get notifications when I put a new video up. In the meantime, thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.